I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: what are the signs of franchise fatigue? And the reason I'm asking this question is because I've gone to the viewer mailbag and Ben sent me an email and he asked me, he said this: I watched your recent video about Solo, and while your point is well taken, I hope franchise fatigue is real, because I'd like to see space open up for new ideas in film. And I couldn't agree more with you on that point, Ben. What do you think would be some early indicators of franchise fatigue? What would be the breaking point for studios to start searching in earnest for new ideas? And where might they draw new talent and ideas from? Okay, so there's three different questions there. Let me start at the beginning. What would be some of the early indicators of franchise fatigue? And I've thought a bit about this question, and it's kind of a hard question to answer, because what you might think would be the early indicators of franchise fatigue, like for example, people are not buying tickets to go and see your movies, or they're not purchasing the home theatre version of your films, that might not be franchise fatigue. That might be just the fact that what you're producing is not artistically very good, or the stories are not compelling, and so people are just not interested. Rather than people saying, well, I'm sick of this, it's more that what's currently being produced is just not that interesting or appealing. Another possible way to perhaps analyse it would be, for an early indicator, might be if you've got some sort of merchandise that's associated with a franchise. So if you're selling toys or other forms of merchandise. And one way that might be an indicator, or one thing that happens that might be an indicator for you as to whether or not there is franchise fatigue, is how well the merchandise is selling, or how the merchandise is selling in particular. So, for example, if people are not investing in the new merchandise, but they are still investing in the older stuff, that could be a possible indicator that they're not really that enamored with the new stuff, but they really love the old stuff. So there's still appeal in the franchise there. It's just you're not giving them the right sort of stuff, and that would indicate that maybe this is, as opposed to being franchise fatigue, this is about the new stuff being rubbish. However, if they're not buying any of the merchandise at all, this might be an indicator that people are just bored with it. They're not interested at all in the property. However, in saying that, there's other factors that at play here too. It could be just that people don't want to go to the cinema. It could be an economic thing. People don't want to spend money. Times are a little bit hard, so they don't want to spend money on movie tickets. It could be that the marketing of a movie is not particularly good. So you might have had a really good film, or even a string of them, but people are not going to see them because the marketing is bad. So it's kind of hard to know for certain whether something is actually directly the result of franchise fatigue, or other factors are involved, because there's a multiplicity of things that you would need to consider. However, I think one way of possibly really getting a handle on this for certain would be to run test screenings of a movie, and then to actually poll your audience, to do proper written surveys of the audience as they're leaving, and to actually ask them specifically about whether or not they feel there's too many of these films, or whether it's time for something new. And if sort of the majority of people are actually telling you, yeah, they are fatigued, then there's a pretty good chance that that's an indicator that the marketplace in general is fatigued by these films as well. As long as you've actually got a good representative sample in your audience, and maybe you've done this a few times and you keep getting the same result back, so you don't just go to one demographic and then ask only one demographic, then there's probably a pretty good chance that would tell you, yeah, there is franchise fatigue going on. And your second question was this: what would be the breaking point for studios to start searching in earnest for new ideas? Well, I think ultimately, I've said this before, ultimately for studios and the studio executives, it's about money. So if they felt that they were losing money hand over fist, and there was no potential to actually start making money again, then they are likely to start looking in new directions. Or ultimately, if they see that there is some potential in a new direction, they think this is going to be a lucrative new direction, then they will head in that direction. The other possibility is that you get someone who becomes a studio executive in an important decision-making position, who is more creative in their focus. So they're not focused primarily on the business side of things. They have a bit of business nous, but their primary focus is on the creative endeavour. And if someone like that, who is really focused on the creative excellence side of filmmaking, manages to make their way up the food chain and into a position of prominence where they have quite a bit of decision-making power, then there's a pretty good chance that they're going to start branching out and allowing new ideas to come to the fore, because they're not going to be focused just on a money-making formula. They are instead going to have some commitment to the creative side of things as well. And lastly, you asked me this? And where might they draw new talent and ideas from? That's a really interesting question. I wonder about whether or not we actually need to start going back to the former model a lot more, which is where we looked at literature as the initial primary source material. I mean, it still happens today, but a lot of the great films of the bygone era of cinema, they were drawn from literary sources, and they were the cinematic adaptations of literature. And so I wonder about whether or not we need to actually go back more to literature, and not just literature in general, but the great literature. You know, delving into the works of Shakespeare, delving into the Greek playwrights. And even if you're not necessarily adapting, word for word those exact things, just immersing yourself in them and then asking yourself the question, how can we tell those stories in a modern context? Can we take these sort of universal mythologies, these universal morality tales, and fit them into a modern context? I think the other thing that's got to happen is there's got to be a rediscovery of mythology. I've talked about this previously. I mean, you could have the most creative and talented writers in the world, but if they are not in touch with, if sort of they're part of a culture that's not in touch with what good mythology should look like, then they're just going to be producing stuff that is technically very excellent, but as far as the mythology and the sort of compelling aspects of storytelling, they're probably still going to be largely absent. So what you want is something that's not so superficial, that goes a bit deeper. And in order to get that depth, which is where you really engage with a story, you need to have a culture that is consistently not just swimming in the shallows, but is actually swimming in the deep end of the pool. And so this requires a return to great philosophy and deeper thinking about stuff. And when you immerse yourself in that, I think it really helps to bring out some real depth and profundity, and that for a person who's engaging with your story is going to be much more compelling. I think the key thing is really just for studios to allow the space for that creativity to actually happen. They've got to stop making solely to formula. They've got to stop just making films that are solely about superheroes or solely Star Wars or solely franchise driven. They've actually got to start giving space, I think, for filmmakers to make one-off projects, just one film that tells a single story and that's it. You're not looking to make a series of sequels. This is not about making money. Just tell me a really good, well-contained, self-contained story in one movie, in and out. And as long as you do it well, it doesn't have to be long, but as long as the story is compelling, the characters are interesting, they're well written, and good craftsmanship has gone into it, then I think that's all people are really asking for from the cinema. So there you go, Ben. Hopefully that answers your questions about that issue. For everyone else out there, if you want to send me questions or topics or articles to explore on the Daily Question, please do that. You can find the contact details in the video description below. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. There's a link in the description below and a link on screen at the end of this video. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on the Daily Question.